This is Chamber Chats. Hi, I'm Bruce Williams, CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. Chamber Chats is made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union, and I like to acknowledge, as always, that I live and work in the ancestral territories of the Lekwungen-speaking Coast Salish nations. And we are broadcasting, as always, from the podcasting studio at Czech Television. Well, as we find more robust activity around travel, one of the great things that I always say is, first of all, the best part of travel is coming home to Vancouver Island. But secondly, if you're doing it by air, you are traveling through one of North America's greatest airports, which is now getting back to previous levels. Geoff Dickson's joining me today. He is the president and CEO of the Victoria International Airport. Geoff, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.
So let's go back a year ago. We were all kind of looking at each other going, well, we're not going to have a holiday. We're not going to travel for Christmas. How does last year at this time compare to right now?
Yeah, I think this time about last year, we're right in that next phase of the pandemic. And I think Dr. Henry had just shut down the province pretty much. And there were orders about, non-essential travel, and people just weren't moving. And Christmas was really somewhat of a disaster in terms of air travel. The way it's shaping up this year is that we've coming out of the summer averaging close to 66% of pre-pandemic levels in comparable months. And we think we're going to be in and around the 65% mark for this Christmas, which is terrific.
Okay, so we're going to talk about some numbers here because you're one of the sort of bellwethers as to what was going on throughout this whole pandemic period, because travel was impacted, first to be impacted, probably last to recover. But the passenger numbers, let's compare the baseline being 2019, which was a great year for everybody. So compare 2019 with what you've gone through with 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking, actually. So the baseline would be 2 million passengers traveling through the airport in a year. When COVID hit in March of 2020, passenger volumes went down 98%. So if you can imagine going from 100 flights a day to 6 flights a day, and going from literally 6,000 people a day through the airport to a handful. So that was quite stunning. And it took the better part of 6 months to build back up. And then we went into another phase and it dipped back down. So we ended up the year 2020, about 570,000 passengers. And this year, the first half was horrific. We were back to about 10% levels. And it was only when we got through the summer that we saw those numbers that I was just referring to. And we're going to end the year about 675,000 passengers, which is about 35% of 2019. Yeah. So a long way to go, but we certainly feel things starting to turn around, notwithstanding Omicron.
Yeah, there you go. So, we've all been through YYJ. We know what kind of a facility it is. It's lovely. It's open. It's airy. How did that go from airy to eerie? Like, how eerie did it feel to be in that big empty airport?
Yeah, it's, when you go down to the beach or you're out for a walk in a park, you want it to be quiet and still and no one around. And when you're in an airport, you want it to be, to a certain extent, kind of bustling and active, and people coming and going, and meeters and greeters and hugs and tears and all of those things has just completely disappeared. And like I was saying, when you go from 6,000 people a day to a handful, it's incredibly eerie. It just doesn't feel right.
The revenues were impacted, of course. I want to talk about that in a second. But let's also talk about the fact that when it was very quiet and things were not going on and you only had a handful of people coming through, there was still a number of services and things that you had to continue providing, even just for that handful, the way you would have done when it was full. So tell me about that.
Yeah, what happens with an airport, you've got a high degree of fixed costs. So whether you have one flight and one passenger or 100 flight and thousands of passengers, you need security guards, you need firefighters and safety crews. And so you have that core complement in place. We have 10 firefighters, for example, that people might not know that are on staff, that have to be staff complements of 3 throughout the day to ensure that level of safety. And the same with the security staff, the same with the administrative functions, that there's a certain number of people that have to be here to keep the doors open.
We're going to talk about this in a little bit here, that you've been winning awards for the airport. It's an amazing experience. You're one of the best airports around. You're also one of the most financially balanced airports
Mm.
in Canada. And a lot of them, through this whole circumstance, found themselves in pretty big trouble because of their financial situation. So let's first of all talk about the stability of yours and how that comes to be.
So the airport business model is driven by sort of revenue streams of airplanes landing, people paying an airport improvement fee, money you're generating from concessions like parking lots and the things like that. And you're taking all of that money and you're reinvesting it in the airport. And the challenge is not to overbuild. If you start to build too far in advance of the demand curve, if demand dries up, you're going to be in real trouble because you're probably leveraging yourself to do that. And we've never taken that approach. We always try to live a little bit below your means, so to speak, but stay just ahead of the demand curve. So when we went into the pandemic, we were one of two airports in the country that were debt free. So that instantly puts you in a little stronger footing because you don't have debt service payments, and then you don't have the bankers calling on you if you're tripping covenants. The one thing that we're really proud of is that we are recognized by a global think tank in Geneva called the Air Transport Research Society as the most efficient airport in North America for a passenger base under 5 million. And that's done by an independent data analysis. So it's not one of those write-in awards. It's based purely on quantitative evidence. And so we're very proud of that. It's easy to run a low cost, low quality airport, and it's easy to run a high cost, high quality airport, but it's hard to run a high quality, low cost airport. And that's always where we've tried to sort of carve our way through, because it's a beautiful region we live in. And we want everyone to be proud of the airport, but we want to do it efficiently too.
Okay, next, we're going to talk about the dollars and cents. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Geoff Dickson. He's the president and CEO of the Victoria International Airport. So as the numbers went down, Geoff, fewer flyers happening all the time, obviously your revenues went down. So let's tell that horror story for a little bit here. Tell me about that.
Probably not over 90% of our revenue is driven by aviation activity. Travelers, either, as I was saying, parking or dining or landing fees from the airlines or airport improvement fees, that almost evaporated immediately. So you have to go to all your contractors. So we have contracts with the car rental companies, bus transportation providers, taxi companies, and we're not going to hold you to the contract terms. We're going to negotiate, and you're going to ride this with us, and we're going to do it as a percentage of our traffic. So if our traffic's at 30%, we're going to charge you 30% of your minimum annual guarantee of your contractual terms. And everyone thought that was pretty fair. Mm-hmm. The one steady stream of revenue we had is land tenants. And we have about 60 land tenants around our 1,200 acres. And so that was a fairly steady stream of revenue, but that's, less than 10% of our total revenue base. So quite challenging. We cut costs. You can't cut costs at a rate when your revenues are falling 90%. You just can't do that. But we knocked 26% of our expenses out immediately, and managed to get through the year actually in both 2020 and 21 forecast this year to make a small pre-cash profit, which is quite extraordinary under those circumstances.
And you talk about the diversity of the business model too, because the lands adjacent to the airport are ones that you manage. That's where we see Titan Boats is building a new place, and the new Amazon warehouse is out there, and there's a marine response thing and the aviation park. So that's all a part of your day-to-day stuff. That's the diversity that protects you from being stuck purely on travel for your revenue.
Well, it is. And we've put a bigger emphasis certainly on land development over the last couple of years. And we've signed a number of deals, exactly what you just talked about, the biggest being the Amazon last mile distribution facility that's currently being constructed. A lot of people don't know of that kind of land development that goes on around the airport, and they don't necessarily know what our physical property looks like. But it's a significant revenue stream for us. And we're just it reminds us during a pandemic, you want to diversify and future-proof your revenues. And so you have to diversify. And we've got a little bit more into the land development side.
You mentioned that you and one other airport were the only ones that were debt-free going into all of this stuff. Some of them, I believe, were going to go bankrupt, or they are at threat of bankruptcy. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it would, a better way to say it, they're having to negotiate like crazy with their bankers. to get some lets and get some refinancing done. They had to do some fairly big moves on their airport improvement fees, which is at Victoria International Airports, it's $15, 1.5. And some of the airports took theirs up by that much. So they went from $23 to $38. Some are at over $40, and all of that is just financing their debt. So they're really not in a position until the market comes back. And even when it comes back, they're not necessarily in a position to address that growth, because you got to deal with your debt servicing and that. So it's a challenging time for the industry by and large.
So I have to think that that accounts for a lot of the bad experiences people have in larger airports in different places around the world. But it's also why your airport is such a great experience, because it's well run and managed by you and your team, and that makes our experience as travelers better.
Well, I think, well, thank you for that. I do know we're lucky. We won a number of awards for service quality on a global scale, and that's something we're very proud of. We know, a number of years ago, CNN Business Travel named us one of the 10 most loved airports in the world, which is kind of an interesting concept for CNN to pick out a little airport like Victoria International Airport. I will say, though, that travelers like simplicity. And so, that it's that fine line between being too small and no vibrancy and being sort of right sized, like the city of Victoria. Like, we all like it because it doesn't have the trappings of New York City, but it doesn't have all the amenities of New York City, but it's got enough. And it's got enough that we like it. It gets us to where we need to go. And yet the travel experience is relatively straightforward.
Somebody I know that traveled through the airport within the last couple of weeks actually remarked on the fact, for example, that your amenities that are on site are so much better than other. The food is great. You have good food there. You've got a great experience. And you did some improvements on the property too, just as a lot of people decided, well, I might as well do home improvements. I can't travel. I can't do anything else. You've done some work at the airport footprint too. Let's talk about that.
We just added a 20,000 square foot expansion to the lower departures area. It's all glass structure. We landscaped around it. It's really quite stunning. You don't typically see landscaping on an airport apron, but you think about the number of turboprop planes and ground loading aircraft that come in, and you think about first and last impression to the region. It's pretty exciting. But we actually started that project in the planning for it in 2017, started building in 2018. And, it's a long project, and we actually completed it right during the heart of COVID in 2020, which is quite a challenge, but, incredibly proud of the final results. And it really does capture everything that we wanted, that you think that you're going to capture when you lay it out on your plans. But to actually see the finished product is something that we're all extremely proud of.
Yeah, and I want to talk in particular about a couple of things. One of our chamber champions, Spinnakers, is in place there and have been for a while. That's great. So you brought in the Fickle Fig too. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Small company located over in North Saanich, have some interesting farm markets, interesting menus and things. And we just approached them and said, would you be interested in setting up a concession in the airport? And they said, sure. They gave it a swing, and in they came. And one of the things I was talking, where I knew we'd made the right choice, is I was speaking with the owner, and I said, well, what do you do about food waste? Do you worry about that? Because that's always a concern in the food and beverage business. And he said, no, we don't worry too much about it. We just feed the pigs.
Oh, so they're well-fed pigs. They're healthier.
Yeah. Well, that's what they said about their pork sandwiches. They're donut-fed pigs. So
the other, that's something that's an experience of local. And when we're traveling through an airport anywhere, that's sometimes your last point of wanting to get a souvenir or something to take back home with you, or take with you as a gift for someone away. Victoria Gin is now in the airport. Tell me about that.
It's interesting. I sat down with the with the owners a few years ago and said, "Hey, what do you think? Well, there's never been a distillery in an airport in North America. You've got an iconic product. It's just been extraordinarily successful for you. How'd you like an exclusive at the airport and come on in?" And he said, "Sure." And so we actually did the deal in, I don't know, a couple of hours in terms of negotiating the financials, and then they built it, to open, unfortunately, right during COVID, but they've just opened and they're up and running and staffing, and it's an incredible product. And it's right there when you come out of the security line and you enter the secure side of the airport, if you will. The Vic Gin distillery is right there, and so far so good. They're very pleased with the sales, and I think it's just only going to get better as the passenger traffic starts to grow.
And as we gradually return to more travel, there are some new routes that are going to be happening for you to use and access other parts of the world from here. We'll talk about that next. Geoff Dickson is our guest on Chamber Chats today. He's the president and CEO of Victoria International Airport. So some new airline models, some new routes, some new destinations are happening out of the airport. Geoff, tell me about that.
This past summer was really kind of interesting because as Atlantic Canada was, I guess, shut down even more so than much of the country, and the United States was effectively closed, and international longer haul business wasn't moving, so the domestic market was a focus. And we were fortunate. We got 3 new routes from WestJet: Ottawa nonstop, Saskatoon nonstop, and Winnipeg nonstop. We saw the creation of a new airlines coming in. Flair Airlines just started up service to Kitchener-Waterloo last summer, which was amazing. New market for us. And then Swoop came in, which is a low-cost subsidiary of WestJet, flying similar markets, Toronto and Edmonton, but again, another low-cost alternative for the market. So we actually, at Victoria, in terms of nonstop destinations domestically, had more than we'd ever had. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily going to look like that next summer. And I mean, we'll certainly see. I think as the US market opens up again, I mean, we'll see what kind of opportunities there are. But at the same time, Lynx Airlines just announced, which is formerly Enerjet. So that's another ultra low cost carrier. And I'm very confident we're going to be getting service from them. Hopefully there'll be something announced and we'll get a sense of what their new route network looks like. And then there's Canada Jetlines on the horizon, another ultra low cost carrier that looks like they're going to get started as well. So very interesting landscape out there to see what it's all going to shape up in the next 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, and when people hear that news, I like to translate a little bit because I used to live in Kitchener, Ontario.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know the geography, the airport is actually east of Kitchener, and it's about an hour into Toronto from there. So if you don't want to fly into Toronto, Kitchener is your plan to do that. Any other international routes being talked about? Any direct flights? There used to be one into San Francisco, for example.
No, we'd love to have that back. United Airlines, it's interesting. They made money on that in the summertime, but in the wintertime, it just became a bit too much of a stretch for them. And that was a function probably of the wrong timing. The better timing to run that plane would be to come in late at night to YYJ overnight and then go out in the morning. That way, if you're the business traveler here in Victoria, let's say, you get there and back in San Francisco in a day. So they knew that, but they just couldn't get the aircraft available to do that. And they had the wrong type of airplane. It was a bit of a gas guzzler. So if we could get access to their Embraers, which are all kind of spoken for right now, I think there's an opportunity to see that market come back. I think the other one I'd like to see is Denver with them. I think that's a great hub for the Eastern US, Southeastern US. Swoop potentially had Vegas loaded in their system. Unfortunately, they're going to have to pull it just because it's taken so long to get clarity for the winter on international designation. It's one thing, you can't just say, oh, Victoria International Airport's open to international flights now and then fill a plane tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, they take several months to book and people are just too uncertain right now for the travel. And then there's a number of Mexico flights that are starting up again. I'm pleased to see we have Puerto Vallarta and Cancun. They're all starting up in January. So it's slowly building back. It's nowhere near where it was, but it's slowly building back.
I've heard a lot of people say they'd love a flight to Palm Desert or to Phoenix because they go there for holidays, sun holidays, golf, or whatever it might be. But there's capacity issues at both ends, I guess. Is that the issue?
No, the big issue is U.S. pre-clearance. And so if you're going to fly nonstop from Victoria to the United States the way we're structured today, we don't have U.S. pre-clearance. You have to fly to an airport that has customs. So that's why there are flights to San Francisco, to Las Vegas, to Phoenix, and to Seattle, for example. And you clear customs there on arrival. And so at Palm Springs, they don't have customs facilities.
Oh, right. Okay.
And that's the biggest market probably from here, the biggest demand. And I get asked that all the time. But the cost for us to build out US pre-clearance is quite extraordinary in terms of a capital investment and the ongoing operating costs for policing and paying for all the border agents. It's millions and millions of dollars annually in operating costs. And the capital build out's probably, I mean, I haven't looked at the numbers for a while, 40 or $50 million to do that. So it's very difficult in the current business construct, and there's not really a compelling business case for it, although we'd all love nonstop flights to Palm Springs.
Yeah.
We'd all love nonstop flights to Maui, and we'd all love nonstop flights to Mesa and Tucson and Phoenix and, you know, a whole host of places.
Yeah. The airline industry in general, in addition to airports and other units, man, when they had all those airplanes, and you and I've talked about this before, all these planes sitting idle for month after month after month after month. What's the process in getting them back into the air, and even the pilots that fly them?
Yeah, so all the pilots have to they have to become recertified, including all the in-flight crews as well. So there's proficiency testing for all the pilots. They have to meet certain levels of mechanical stability. And so there's all the various checks that have to go through from a maintenance perspective. And so, you know, end to end to get an aircraft that's been sitting idle can be 2 to 3 months to get it back in the sky. It's not overnight, start it up.
Just to wrap it up here, you're a guy who travels through airports around the world on business, and you have a different scrutiny on those facilities when you go through them because you run the airport here. Do you have a favorite airport next to YYJ? Is there one around the world that you think is just a great operation and a great experience?
There's a number of them. I think Changi in Singapore is probably the most stunning. I went through the Dubai airport a number of years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I thought that was pretty sensational, the way that they had it designed and laid out. They have such a, I mean, whenever you're building an airport from scratch and you just sort of start at ground zero, you can build it absolutely right. I mean, I always look at that with a degree of envy because at YYJ, we're kind of working off an old building and sort of building out from there. But those are two of the best. Some of the US airports, I think Atlanta has done an amazing job. I mean, it's the largest airport in the world. It's 100 million people a year are going through that airport. And they do it pretty seamlessly, I think. It's amazing how they move people around.
Well, thanks for all you do to make this airport such a great experience and something that we can all be proud of, and we appreciate all the work you've done through the pandemic as well. Geoff Dickson is the president and CEO of the Victoria International Airport. Geoff, always a pleasure to catch up.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you all again for another Chamber Chat.